Frankly, that stuff was searching.
So is the mother panel on?
Yes.
Some of them are starting to work smarter now. No, I had one that attended me, my parents' bank, that said that they didn't, they needed like their name and address because they had lost it in their system. And my dad almost gave it to her, and I'm like, are you kidding me?
I have one that you got over. We're just checking on you because you made a transaction that looks unusual. So please log in and verify.
They sent you out to the store. I was telling my son, he's got a bank crash, so he sent me today. I'm a millionaire.
Okay, as long as you need those slides on towards my Sally Bay, we're good. I support you.
Right.
Oh, let's touch Shad. We tell her about the card.
No, but they're not, you know.
Yeah, me and G, two people, started to share.
They felt like they could do it.
We had lunch,
Dawn.
Wzig, Sergeant Shad, he's from Lakewood, Jack, the inventory of the vehicle, and then possibly Switch. Yeah.
Some of the officers have asked them.
Okay. I always thought if you're on your public table. Okay.
Ready, Chad?
Yeah, you put that all the way down this one, didn't you?
No, that was from the other day.
Even Mary just ordered a sweater now. Stop feeling comfortable.
All rise. Court is in session. Please be seated.
Welcome back, everyone. I video on you and I turned the air conditioning off. Right now, it's like when you're at the beach and you walk into the condo. You have on the state.
Yes, Your Honor. The state will call Officer Timothy Shad.
Sir, if you could raise your right hand, you solemnly swear or affirm subject to the penalties of perjury that the testimony you're about to give here will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
I do.
Please be seated.
Good morning, Sergeant. Can you please state your full name and spell it for the record?
Timothy J. Shad, S-C-H-A-D.
And, sir, are you employed?
Yes.
Where at?
City of Lakewood.
And what do you do for the city of Lakewood?
I'm a sergeant in the police department.
And how long have you been employed by the city of Lakewood?
22 years.
And how long have you been in the position of a sergeant?
6 years.
Were you employed as a sergeant for the city of Lakewood on September 15, 2016?
Yes.
What was your assignment that day?
My assignment was the road supervisor for the day.
As a road supervisor for the day, did you have the occasion to receive a call for service related to a fatal crash?
Yes.
What did you do once you received the call?
We received a call for service that there was an accident up on the highway, so I responded to that call along with other units.
And what did you do once you responded to the call?
Once I responded to the call, I pulled onto the on-ramp and I went to the actual scene, seeing if there, to see if there was any other aid to render to the victim. Once that was complete, we secured the scene as best we could and then moved on from there.
Upon arriving to the scene, what were your observations?
I pulled onto the scene. I pulled onto the Alger on-ramp for 90 westbound, and I left my cruiser there because there were other public safety vehicles already on the scene, along with several other vehicles, and traffic had already been stopped going in the westbound direction for 90. I pulled my vehicle there, exited my cruiser, and went down to the scene. There were bystanders, other police officers from my agency, and medic units and fire units rendering aid to Trooper Velez, who was on the ground at that point.
Once you observed that Trooper Velez was having aid rendered to him and there were bystanders and officers on the scene, what did you do next?
Once I realized that they had enough help rendering aid and they were all set in that capacity, I began to look around at the scene to identify if there were any witnesses or what else needed to be done at that current time.
And Sergeant Shad, why were you doing that?
Since they were set with rendering aid at that point, I wanted to make sure if there were witnesses or there were people that had information, that we were able to get their information, we were able to get their statements, and I wanted to make sure, at that point I didn't know if the driver of the vehicle was still there, if the car was still there. It was very preliminary at that point.
What happened next?
I began speaking with two people initially that were kind of reviewing what they had seen or what they had heard during the course of the crash. And I I obtained their information, and ultimately I gave that information to another officer, Officer Maurer, that was also on scene, and she was able to obtain statements from them at a later time once Trooper Velez was already transported to the hospital.
And Sergeant Shad, while you're doing all of this, are you wearing, what equipment are you wearing?
I'm wearing my standard equipment that I would wear on the road during the course of my duties, which would be my full uniform, my duty belt, which would include my, radio, handcuffs, taser, service weapon, my body camera.
During this time period, is your body camera activated?
Yes, I activated it at some point when I initially got onto the scene.
Can you explain to us how the body camera works?
Sure. Once you, if you have any interactions with the public, our body camera is to be turned on, if it's safe to do so, obviously. But once you do that, you just press the button that's on the body camera. It activates it. It's on as long as the power is initially turned on. But once you do that, you just press the button and it activates.
And why did you activate your body camera responding to this scene, officer?
Well, it was a call for service, so it was by policy activated.
And if you were to see your body camera footage, would you recognize it?
Yes.
All right, this time the state requests to play State's Exhibit 1513.
Yes.
I think I'm okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Honor.
And Sergeant Shad, do you recognize State's Exhibit 1513?
Yes.
And can you please tell us what this is?
Yes, this was as I described after I arrived on scene and noticed that I couldn't really be of assistance rendering aid because they were all set in that capacity. I began talking with these gentlemen here, the gentleman in the white t-shirt and the black t-shirt, and they were relaying some of the observations that they had from the scene.
And sir, is this footage from your body camera?
Yes.
And is it the same or substantially similar condition to when you captured it?
Yes, you cannot edit it.
And what is it that you're doing at this point in the video, Sergeant?
Initially, when I got on scene, like I stated, I believe there were a lot of units. There were police units, there were bystanders, there were police units. So the scene was relatively chaotic initially. So once the aid was being rendered, I went to these parties to try, like I said, to make sure that if there were people that observed this accident, that we at least had their information, so at a later time or that day we could go back and get their information and get their statement as to what they had seen or heard as a result of that crash. And to add to that, the other officers that were on scene, Officer Maurer, Investigator Fiorelli, they were still rendering aid to Trooper Velez at this point. So I wanted to kind of take an active role in getting the information so they could handle any statements or anything that would be needed later in the course of the invest.
And were you the Lakewood supervisor on scene at this point in time?
Yes. And this gentleman, I believe, in the gray t-shirt was a medic, I believe, for the city of Cleveland who was driving by or through the area who also assisted in rendering aid.
What other steps did you take in assisting on scene, Sergeant Shad?
As soon as I was complete talking with them, I was making sure that the driver of the vehicle was still there, the car was still there, so if it was not, I could relay information on a suspect car that if it had left the scene, and I was able to verify that it indeed did not leave the scene. It was still pulled up further, as you can see in the video.
And were you able to determine who the driver of the vehicle was?
One of the parties that were on scene initially pointed out who the driver was, yes.
And do you see that person in the courtroom today?
Yes.
Stipulate to identity, Your Honor.
Record will reflect the identification determined by this witness.
Thank you, Your Honor. And Sergeant Shad, at this point in time, what is it that you're trying to do?
I believe at that point I was calling the station, advised them of the nature, the extent of the injuries to my supervisor, and that we were going to be on the highway assisting the state patrol in Cleveland and closing sections of it until our investigation was complete.
Now, Officer Shad, you indicated that you were going to be on the highway assisting the Ohio Highway Patrol and Cleveland. Why were you just there assisting?
Where this accident occurred is not our jurisdiction.
And so would you have been in charge of this investigation? Or
I would not have.
And why is that?
It was not our jurisdiction to be in charge of that investigation.
And you indicated that it would be the Ohio State Highway Patrol or Cleveland in charge. At this point in time, did you know which agency would be taking over the investigation?
I don't believe it. Initially, I did not know who would be handling the actual investigation.
And so what led you to believe it would be either Cleveland or the Ohio Highway Patrol?
Shortly thereafter, one of the lieutenants with the Highway Patrol advised that they would be handling the investigation.
And based on your experience in this area, is it uncommon for the Highway Patrol to handle investigations related to crashes of this significance?
It is not uncommon.
Why not?
Due to their duties, their training, and I'm assuming the experience they have on the highway, they've responded to the scene for several accidents, fatalities and serious accidents, and handled those investigations.
Now, Sergeant Shad, after Trooper Velez was transported, what did you do next?
I gave the information I initially received from the two witnesses to Officer Maurer, advised her to verify all that information and then obtain a statement for them to assist the Highway Patrol, because I believe there were several parties that had to leave or wanted to leave, had other things happening that day, so I wanted to make sure at least we had some information to pass along to the Highway Patrol. And at that point, once he was transported, I was making an effort to get everybody out of the actual accident scene so the State Highway Patrol could conduct the investigation they needed to conduct in regards to where evidence was, where cars were, things of that nature.
And Sergeant Shad, why are you attempting at this point in time to get everyone out of the scene?
I wanted to secure the scene as best I could. Obviously, there were many people, like I said initially, that were in that scene originally rendering aid, and you had the vehicle that was involved, things of that nature. So once that was complete, everybody that I could get out of that scene, I wanted to secure it. So any pieces of evidence or any other thing of evidentiary value, the State Patrol could at least photograph or handle however they deemed appropriate.
And Sergeant Shad, after securing the scene, did you have any other role in assisting in this crash?
I ultimately pulled my cruiser down onto the highway to attempt to tape it off and securing that scene. And at that point, our role was basically a support role in traffic and anything else that the State Highway Patrol would need. Several of our officers maintained traffic posts that closed down portions of the highway and the on-ramp so they could, the State Highway Patrol could safely do their job.
Thank you. One moment, please, Your Honor.
Yes.
And Sergeant Shad, for your body camera footage, is there typically audio?
Yes.
Okay. And this footage was just on mute, but there was audio associated with this, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And in relation to collecting the physical evidence from Trooper Velez, how was that process done?
The actual collection of it as evidence would have been done through the State Highway Patrol, but there were several points on scene in relation to Trooper Velez's duty belt, his duty weapon. I actually we collected those from an area, obviously, to secure those, and we gave those to one of the State Highway Patrol officers on scene.
And why did you or Lakewood Police secure those items?
There were a large amount of people down there, and at that point, I didn't want his service weapon sitting on the side of the road.
And Your Honor, I do believe there is a stipulation from the defense that there is audio associated with this exhibit 1513. It can be played later if necessary.
Correct, Your Honor.
Thank you.
Thank you. Nothing further at this time, Your Honor.
Mr. Sen?
No questions, Your Honor. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Your Honor, at this time, the state will call Don Wzig.
Mr. Coach? Raise your right hand. Solemnly swear or affirm, subject to the penalty of perjury, that the testimony about the case will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. You can see it.
Good morning, Ms. Wzig. Can you please state and spell your name for the record?
Dawn Wzig, Zwettzig.
And the chair doesn't move, but the microphone does adjust, so if you need to pull that up or whatnot, just whatever you need to do so I can hear you back here, okay?
Very good.
And ma'am, are you employed?
Yes.
Where are you employed at?
I work for the Department of Public Safety, the Bureau of Motor Vehicles.
And how long have you worked there?
Approximately 14 years.
And what is your assignment at the Department of Motor Vehicles?
My position is I'm a chief of the district, the regional district office.
And what area does that encompass?
We have 17 counties, Northeast Ohio. I have an office in Parma and one in Youngstown.
And what are your responsibilities as the district coordinator for that area?
I oversee field staff, and who oversees 71 license bureaus and limited authority deputy registrars.
And are you familiar with the process of a license being issued in the state of Ohio?
Yes.
Can you explain to us that process?
An applicant comes into a license bureau. The deputy registrar employee will qualify the customer. Depending on what they need, they will require the proper documents and possibly some paperwork. Once it's determined that they're eligible for a credential, the deputy registrar employee will enter the information into the computer system. Once everything's satisfied through that, the customer will review all of the answers that they gave and what the clerk entered onto a signature pad. The B&B has a paperless application now, so there's no paper. And then once they review all that, they sign. Their electronic signature confirms that they've reviewed all the information, and they can either accept or decline. And after that, if they need to, during that process, if there's any other testing like vision screening and whatnot, they conduct that, capture the image, and then the credential is processed over the counter that same day.
You had indicated that if somebody is eligible, they will receive a license. What makes somebody eligible to receive a license?
For any credential that's issued by the B&B, they have to provide documentation, like the 5 elements: name, date of birth, social security, residential address, and citizenship, proof of citizenship.
What sort of things would preclude someone from being eligible to receive an Ohio license?
If they cannot provide all 5 elements, they're automatically disqualified. If they're under suspension, they're automatically disqualified.
Like indicated, if someone is under suspension, they are automatically disqualified. Is that just suspension in Ohio, or does that cover suspensions elsewhere as well?
Elsewhere as well.
And does it cover all states if they're suspended elsewhere?
Yes.
So what happens if someone is suspended in another state and attempts to obtain an Ohio license?
Well, a couple of different things can happen if you're under suspension. The very first question that is asked is, are you under suspended or revocation? Is your driver's license suspended or revoked or canceled or otherwise disqualified or subject to an out-of-service order in this state or any other state?
Okay, you went through that really fast.
I mean, I have to, but I have to memorize.
Can you slow down and go through that for me one more time?
Are your driving privileges now suspended or revoked or canceled or otherwise disqualified or subject to an out-of-service order in this state or any other state?
And at what phase in the Ohio license application is that question asked or shown to someone attempting to obtain a license?
That's the very first question.
Of what process?
Once they provide all 5 elements to us, that's the first question that's asked once the clerk is entering their information into the system.
Now, why is that the first question that's asked, if you know?
I don't.
Okay.
I would believe it's an automatic disqualifier.
So, someone being suspended in another state is an automatic disqualifier for Ohio license.
Right.
And at the time that someone is obtaining or attempting to obtain an Ohio license, who is required to notify the Ohio B&B of a suspension in another state?
Well, like I said, a couple of different things can happen. Suspensions can happen at different times and in different states. You know, all the computers are talking to each other. So even in Ohio, you can be suspended today and walk in tomorrow. The suspension is not in the system. So we rely on the customer telling us that they're under suspension in that case. Is that what you're asking?
Yes.
Okay.
What happens after a customer discloses that their license is suspended?
They are if they're going for a driver's license, they are only eligible for a state identification card. They choose that route, then they would have to sign a waiver stating for their cancellation of driving privileges.
You indicated that this is the first question that is asked to an individual after they've met the 5 initial requirements. What happens next in the process of obtaining a license?
They're asked a series of questions. We refer to them as status questions.
And what happens after all the status questions are asked?
We ask all the particulars, name, we verify. It depends on the transaction. It's very complicated. There's not one easy answer, but we go through all of the things, your hair color, your weight, your height, organ donations, living wills, voting registration, donating to the charities.
And after all that information is provided and those questions are answered, what are the next steps in the process?
The customer reviews, we have called a signature pad, and it's like a little mini screen. And the customer, after all the questions are asked and answered, like I said, the clerk is entering it. The customer has to review each screen, and they have to hit next or accept, or an alternatively decline or back. They can go back and review, but each of the questions that they answered are on that signature pad, and so they review it, and it does state exactly what they said. So if they said, I am an organ donor, it'll say, I am an organ donor, things of that nature.
Okay. After the customer has reviewed all of these items on the signature pad, then what happens?
They sign it. They sign the signature pad. It's an electronic signature that confirms that that all the information on there is accurate and correct.
One more.
Yeah.
Now you walked us through the process for obtaining a license. Is this the same process for a temporary permit? Or similar process?
Mm-hmm.
Are these same set of questions asked if the individual is obtaining a temporary permit?
Yes.
So if the individual is obtaining a temporary permit and a license, are these questions actually asked once or twice?
For each transaction. You can hold a license and a temporary license, depending on the class and what the temporary license is for.
So if the individual walks into the Ohio B&B and applies for a temporary permit, what questions are posed to them?
The same.
The same question as for a license.
Mm-hmm.
And do they have to complete the same signature and process of reviewing the signature pad?
Yes.
Now why is that?
Well, each transaction, because things can change. You could walk in this morning and walk out and come back this afternoon, and in between you may have been pulled over for an OVI. So every single transaction, we ask the same questions.
Now, if after going through this process, somebody receives a license, but in fact they were suspended in another state, what happens?
Can you ask that question again?
Yes. If after going through this process, somebody receives an Ohio license, but they were in fact suspended in another state, what happens to that Ohio license? If you know.
From our point of view, I have nothing to do with that point from once that they leave my license bureau.
So that's not handled by your department, correct?
Not by my department.
That's handled by another department of the B&B.
Correct.
Thank you. Nothing further at this time, Your Honor.
Good morning, ma'am.
Hi.
How are you?
Okay.
My name is John Sid. I'm going to ask you some questions. If I ask you anything you don't understand, you can just ask me to repeat it. Is it okay?
Very good.
Where do you work out of? Is it Columbus office?
No, sir. I have an office in Parma, and I have an office in Youngstown.
Okay. You indicate, are you from either one of those places?
I live in Warren.
Okay. I'm from Youngstown.
Okay.
Okay. You're chief of the district of the B&B, right?
Yes, District 1, correct.
And you cover 17 counties
Yes, sir.
and 71 license bureaus.
Correct.
What are license bureaus?
License bureaus are where the B&B conducts their business. issue driver's licenses. We issue credentials and vehicle registration.
Okay. So you're talking about the place where I go to get plates on my car?
Yes.
Or where I take my kid to get her driver's license, or I go every couple of years to get my license renewed?
Correct.
And you go on a Saturday before 1 usually, and you wait in the line, and then they call you up and that kind of stuff, right?
Yes,
So I think most of us have been through that, and you try and put them all over. You've got like in strip malls, and you've got them just all over the place to be convenient for people.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now these employees that are in these license bureaus, do they work for the State of Ohio Department of Motor Vehicles?
No, sir.
Who do they work for?
Each of the license bureaus are run by a contractor called a deputy registrar, so they have to put in a bid and they're awarded the license bureau. So the deputy registrar themselves is not an employee of the state of Ohio. They're a contractor. And so they hire their own staff.
Okay, so these folks aren't state employees, not part of the state retirement system, they're not getting state benefits. Okay, but yet you rely on them to carry out some of the policies of the Bureau of Motor Vehicles.
All the policies and procedures, yeah.
Now, in this particular case, you indicate that an individual could walk in and ask for help in getting a driver's license. Is that safe to say?
Well, we try to help all of our customers, yes.
Okay. But part of your job is not just to issue things, it's also to provide information to the public, is it not?
Yes.
When I walk in, there's like a bunch of books on motorcycle safety and motor safety and all that stuff. Is that fair to say? Sitting in a rack somewhere?
Maybe not boater safety,
not boater.
but...
Okay. And then if I have questions about something, like what kind of identification do I need to bring, you folks answer that,
Correct.
right? Mm-hmm. And these deputy registrars even take phone calls. Sometimes when you're waiting in line to get served, they'll take a phone call right in front of you and talk to somebody about the steps needed to get their license back or whatever business is taken care of, right?
Yes, sir.
So if I were to come into your agency and ask you for a driver's license, you would ask me this series of, well, you wouldn't because you're working for the BMV, but if I were to go into a deputy registrar, one of their employees would work with me, correct?
Yes, sir.
And if I asked for a driver's license, they would ask me these questions, specifically this one about, are you driving privileges suspended, revoked, or out of service order? Would they ask that, or would they give me a piece of paper to look at?
No, they ask you that verbally.
Okay. And how do you assure that they ask that every time?
Well, we have field staff that go in there. Well, first of all, they have to key in something, okay? They can't just... They are required to ask and have answered all the questions that are provided to them. But we do have a system where we have field staff that go in there and monitor this regularly, and we get reports regularly.
What if I walk in and I say, I'm not sure if I'm suspended. I used to be. I was suspended out of state, but I don't know anymore. Could you check for me? What would your response be?
Well, the employee's response, we have license control, so they have the opportunity to call license control if they're unsure, and they can do a social security check through them.
Okay, so there is a procedure for somebody who's unsure as to what the status of their license is for the BMV to check that out.
Correct.
Now, I understand sometimes the information the BMV has is not extremely current. And I guess what I'm referring to, ma'am, is how you said earlier, you could pick up a DUI over lunch, and your status could change that quickly.
Yes.
Okay, so I do appreciate that there's a lag time that we're talking about here.
Correct.
But in general, are the states supposed to put in the status of individuals' licenses into some kind of big computer that you all get to look at?
I don't know if the states have to do that. I don't know if it's mandatory or not. That's not outside of my realm. But I know that there is a system. We refer to it as SIDLIS or PDPS or the National Driving Check. So
let's go with National Driving Check. That
okay.
I can remember.
Okay. Yes, sir.
What are those acronyms?
We refer to, they're just on our computer, and it says SIDLIS or PDPS. And I don't know what they stand for. I'm sorry.
So theoretically, if someone came in and said, I don't know if I'm still suspended, I used to be, your agency, or specifically the subcontractor's employee, would then most likely go into one of those systems, a national database, and determine whether or not that individual... No?
No, sir.
Okay, what would happen?
Well, when the information is originally entered into the system checks every time, every entry.
Okay.
And so if there's one that's in the system, it will it will pull up and it won't let you go any further.
So if I don't know, and I have to rely on you and your system to tell me what the status of my license is, barring a lag time situation, your system should kick that out and say, no, you're not eligible.
Can you repeat that?
I know.
Sorry.
That's okay, man. With the exception of the lag time, and by lag time I mean that time where your status could change quickly and maybe things didn't get updated within an hour or a day. But barring that, if I come in and I don't know what the status of my license is, would the employees of the deputy registrar be able to check that for me?
No.
Okay. Would the computer automatically kick it out if I'm suspended somewhere else?
If you're suspended and it's in the computer, it would automatically kick it out.
Okay. Obviously, Ohio doesn't want suspended drivers flooding here to get licenses where they're not eligible elsewhere. Is that probably fair to say?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay.
We don't issue credentials to people under suspension.
This is a big deal, right?
Yes.
Okay. I mean, as a state government, you're giving them you don't even call them ID cards. You call them credentials, right?
Correct.
Because these have some weight behind them. They're a state ID, and they can get you into buildings and cash checks and drive.
Correct.
So I imagine that there are fail-safes built into your system to at least check and see whether or not a person's suspended in the system somewhere.
The fail-safe would be the computer system.
Okay. So if I walk out of there with a valid license, I can assume that the fail-safe didn't generate any type of denial for that individual.
If you walk out of the license bureau and your license was under suspension, it's been my experience that if you're under suspension, you know you're under suspension. That's been my experience.
Right.
That's number one. But number two, is there an opportunity for somebody to come in and not tell the truth to the clerk and just click the button and sign it? Yes. The computer may not pick it up, and yes, they may walk out with a valid Ohio driver's license that technically is suspended someplace else.
Okay. Well, let's go over that again then. Okay. Even though they're suspended somewhere else, they would walk out of your license bureau with a valid Ohio license that is valid in the state of Ohio.
Yes.
Okay.
Well, yes.
I mean, the system didn't catch it or they didn't reveal it.
Correct.
At any rate, that's going to be a valid credential for this state until someone challenges it or until, no. I understand your point about people know they're under suspension, especially if it's an in-state suspension. Would you agree with me?
I don't agree with you. I think that if you're suspended, you know you're suspended.
What if you think your suspension is up?
Excuse me?
What if you think your suspension is up?
Typically, it just isn't that easy. I mean, typically there's fines and fees and things, hoops to jump through before you can. It's not just like it's a date that it's just up. It's not like a birthday or something like that.
Well, what if, in a move where I move, are the rules from states different from state to state to state?
Absolutely.
So a state like Alabama could have different rules than maybe a state like Ohio.
I have no knowledge of the rules in any other state.
Okay, but if I wanted to know the rules of Ohio and whether I'm eligible in Ohio, the best place for me to come is to the deputy registrar, right?
To the reinstatement center.
Okay. What if I don't? What if I just want to go and ask questions about how do I get a license in this state?
Well, if you go to a deputy registrar and the deputy registrar can't help you, they may refer you to the phone numbers to call. We also have online chat that they can exercise, or they can go to a reinstatement office. There is one here in Parma, for instance.
Is it possible that my client could have walked into a deputy registrar and said, I don't know if I'm suspended or not, I think it's up, and you folks could have ran his information and he could have walked out with a valid Ohio license? We
wouldn't have run his information. We don't have that capability in the deputy registrars. That we only process the application that's they're there for.
I think I used that term wrongly. Let me rephrase that. Is it possible that my client could have walked in and said, I don't know the status of my license, can I have an Ohio license? And could you check and see whether I'm allowed to have one? And you folks could have taken the application didn't get fail-safed out, and he would have walked out with a valid Ohio license that he was good to drive on.
That's a kind of a complicated question. I think that if somebody came into a license bureau and said that, I don't know. What they would do is most likely call license control and verify if they can do anything further from them. But the employee in the license bureau doesn't have that capability. What I see that typically happens is people just say, when they are asked that first question, they don't typically own up to the fact that they have a suspended license. They just typically say no, and then they keep going because that doesn't stop the process.
And because this happens a lot.
I don't know if it happens a lot.
Okay. Because it's known to happen. It's definitely
Right.
something that happens.
Okay.
Your system takes that into account?
Our system takes that into account.
Because your system does a check of some sort, a fail-safe, with other states on the national database to determine whether or not a suspension is showing from another state.
It's immediate. Right. That happens immediately. Once the first information, the name, date of birth, and social, that's the first thing that the system does.
And if it doesn't kick it out,
the clerk would have no knowledge or have any opportunity to run or check or anything like that. That's not in the wheelhouse of the clerk.
And then that individual that came in would walk out and that license would be valid.
Correct.
Okay. Thank you.
Sure.
Ms. Sweatwig, you were asked some questions about who runs each licensing bureau, correct? Now, the information, the questions that you asked is about on the keypad or the signature pad. Mm-hmm. Are those standard across all the bureaus?
Yes.
And regardless of which clerk is asking which questions, all those questions, do they appear the same on each signature pad?
Yes.
And each licensing bureau?
Yes.
So regardless of what question the clerk actually poses to someone, that question is still asked before someone can sign to obtain either a temporary permit or a license.
Yes.
Okay. So the onus is on the person applying for a license to disclose this information.
That's correct.
Now, you were asked a lot of questions about what's in the computer system in regards to suspended licenses and whatnot. Are you, or is the Ohio BMV, do you have control over what information another state inputs into the system?
No.
Why not?
Because that's on the other states and how they're set up. So you've got 50 different entities, and I'm assuming I don't even know if all 50 subscribe to that. I can't speak to that, but yeah, everybody has their own set of rules.
So the Ohio BMV only has control or can deal with the information that's inputted by another state?
The system basically, I'm not sure how it works, but once you put the identifiers in the system and hit next, the computer checks the National Driving Registry or whatever it's called, so this PDPS from my point of view. It checks that, and if it comes back as a hit, it'll have a message will come on the bottom of the screen. I'm sorry if I'm not answering your...
No, you are.
Okay.
And then, if there is no error message that pops up on that screen, is there still a potential that somebody's license in another state is suspended?
Yes.
And who is required to disclose that information at that time they receive either a temporary permit or license about their license being suspended in another state?
The customer.
And if in fact the customer's license is suspended in another state, would they be issued an Ohio license?
Not if they say that my license is suspended, it stops the process.
And so if an individual were to lie or mislead the BMV and whether or not they were suspended from another state, what happens to that Ohio license?
The person's issued and they walk out with it.
They walk out the door with a license even though they provided false information to
Correct.
the Bureau. And what steps, if you know, does the Bureau take to remedy that false information that was provided to you all?
That's not my department. I don't know.
Another department takes that issue, correct? Okay. And you said that in your experience, somebody who has a suspension knows they have a suspension, correct?
That's been my experience.
In your experience, are people sometimes dishonest about whether or not they have a suspension?
Correct.
Why would that be?
Because they want the credential.
And if in fact they are suspended, they're not legally entitled to that credential, correct?
Correct.
You were asked some questions in regards to reinstatement or what somebody would do to reinstate a license. What is the process in Ohio for a license to be reinstated after it's been suspended? Or is there a process?
There is a process. I'm not the person to ask that. I really could not give you that proper information, sorry.
But there is a separate process outside of what's done at your division, correct?
Yes, there's a whole reinstatement office, and that's all I do is reinstatements.
There's a whole office for reinstatement in Ohio?
There's multiple ones. There's one in Parma, there's one in Youngstown.
So an individual attempting to reinstate a suspended Ohio license couldn't even walk into one of these bureaus that you supervise. They would have to go to an entirely different office.
To be reinstated, yes.
And so that's why you're unfamiliar with that process,
Correct.
Okay. You also mentioned that people don't always own up to the fact that they have a suspended license. Why did you say that?
Well, people have different motivations for why they need that credential. So, I mean, I can only guess. My license has never been suspended, thankfully. But I know that people need it for work purposes. Sometimes they need that. And if their license is suspended, I think that's a strong motivation to come into life. And it's just my experience. I don't know. I'm sure there's other reasons why somebody would lie to get that driver's license.
And you were asked a lot of questions again about the information that comes out of the computer, but the computer is in fact the fail-safe for this process, is it not?
I think you could look at it like that, but...
And the initial check is the person attempting to gain the temporary permit or the driver's license actually being honest and making that disclosure, correct?
Correct.
And at the end of the day, before they receive those credentials, they have to acknowledge and sign off on an official B&B document that they're not suspended, correct?
Correct. They have the opportunity. They see that exactly how they answered it comes up on the screen, so they see exactly how it says, my license is or is not, I believe, under suspended or revoked or canceled or otherwise disqualified. So that is or is not is in bold and it's in capital letters.
And if somebody were to receive those documents and were to sign off of them, does your department keep those records?
It's a paperless system. If they wanted to, they could ask the clerk, and the clerk can hit a button to print them. Is that what you're asking?
Right, but does your department normally keep those records?
Electronically.
How are they maintained?
Electronically.
And does your department have the ability to print those documents if necessary?
Yes.
And is that kept in the ordinary course of business?
Yes.
My approach, please, Your Honor?
Yes.
I'm sorry. Thank you. Yeah.
Ma'am, I'm handing you what's been marked for identification purposes as States Exhibit 1472 and 1473. Can you take a moment to review these items? And ma'am, generally speaking, do you recognize what these items are?
Yes.
And can you explain to us what they are?
It's the application for a temporary permit for the first one, and the second one is the application for a driver's license.
And what information is contained on those applications?
Everything that the clerk asks, all the, name, date of birth, gender, height, weight, hair, eyes, citizenship, residential address, residency, what class it is, what restrictions, endorsements, expiration date, the transaction type, and all of the questions that were answered on the status questions, all the responses.
And are those the questions we've been talking about thus far?
Yes.
And is included in that question, what's the first question on both of those forms?
Well, it's just the response. It's not the question.
What is the response?
I do have a current driver's license or ID card from Ohio, ID number, and then it lists the RK988155.
And on those questions, does it ask about a suspended license in another jurisdiction?
Yes, it says I do not have driving privileges now suspended or revoked or canceled or otherwise disqualified or subject to an out-of-service order in this state or any other state.
And is there a signature that's usually required at the bottom of these forms?
Yes, ma'am, it's an electronic signature.
And in fact, on the bottom of State's Exhibit 1472 and 1473, is there a signature at the bottom of these forms?
Yes, ma'am.
And based on the exhibits in front of you, whose forms do these belong to? What's the name on the top of the form?
Joshua Joseph Gaspar.
And what is the date for the signing of the temporary permit form?
February 10th, 2016.
And what's the date of the signing of the driver's license form?
February 11th, 2016.
And on both those forms, was the defendant asked about whether or not there was a suspended license from another jurisdiction?
Yes, ma'am.
And on both of those forms, the defendant signed that there was no suspended license from another jurisdiction.
Correct.
One moment, please, Your Honor.
Yes.
Nothing further at this time, Your Honor.
Man, what are the dates again? For the temporary, the first one you would have got.
February 10th, 2016.
Okay, and then for the permanent?
February 11th, 2016.
Okay. Now, you indicated that folks could probably walk into a regular deputy registrar and lie and walk out with a credential, right? What if I have questions about whether or not I'm eligible? I need some help clearing up things to get my license. Is there a special place I would go?
Well, I can see from the applications, he went to 1814, which is the Permanent License Bureau, so they probably would have sent him 3 doors down to the Reinstatement Center for any questions.
In fact, that's accurate. So if I told you that my client was sent from that license bureau to the special place, the Reinstatement Center, 3 doors down, where they had him pay off some old parking tickets, and then sent him back to Parma and gave him a valid license, would that seem consistent with what you have there?
Objection, Your Honor.
Please approach, Mary.
it's mine. Sorry.
I'll just have to wait about 10 minutes for you.
Ma'am, we were talking about reinstatement bureaus, correct?
Reinstatement offices.
Reinstatement offices. And there's one in Parma,
Yes, sir.
and it's right 3 doors down from the agency that my client went to.
Yes, sir.
Can you tell from looking at that document whether or not my client went to that agency?
No, sir.
Can you tell from the fact that he had a temporary license on one day and the very next day had a permanent license that he would have went to that agency?
No, sir.
Okay. Is it the policy of your deputy registrars and employees that you supervise to send somebody to the reinstatement office when there's questions as to what they need to do to get their license valid?
It's not policy. It's most likely procedure for the clerks.
Okay. I mean, when there's a question, those are about getting your license back, there are a more specialized group of folks to help with that.
Yes, and it's convenient.
Can you tell from looking at those documents as to whether or not my client went through that agency or not? That reinstatement?
I cannot tell that from these.
Okay. Were you asked by the state to bring a file with you or to review any of my client's personnel records?
No, sir.
Okay. So you don't know, based on the information you came in here today with, whether or not he actually went through those steps or saw a reinstatement bureau or whether he went in and lied?
No, sir. This is the first. I've seen the applications.
Okay. Is that record maintained by the state of Ohio?
Yes.
Who would we talk to try and find out whether or not my client went to a reinstatement bureau? Do you know?
I don't know how the reinstatement offices monitor that, so I'd probably refer you to the reinstatement personnel.
Pursuant to your job duties, would that be something that you would look into or could look into for us, or that's not something you're...
I don't. That's a whole separate department.
Okay. So you really have no knowledge of how my client obtained his driver's license other than what you see on those 2 pieces of paper?
Yes, sir.
You don't know whether he went in and lied, right?
I do not know that.
Or you don't know whether or not he asked for help and the license registration people told him what steps to take?
I have no knowledge of who he talked to or what information he was given.
Okay. Thank you for your time today.
Sure. Thank you so much.
We're going to be calling Amber Lynn Daniels. That's hyphenated Amber Lynn.
From?
The Ohio Bureau of Motor Vehicles are on.
solemnly swear or affirm, subject to the penalties of perjury, testify about the gift here will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Yes.
Candace, have you ever been recorded?
No.
All right, the chair won't move. You'll have to move up to the microphone and
Okay.
use the voice like from you.
Okay.
Ms. Daniels, can you hear me?
Yes.
That's good.
That's good, right?
Yes, just make sure that you speak slowly. Mary's
Okay.
taking down everything that you're saying.
Okay.
Good volume. Just keep it slow.
All right.
Would you please state your full name and spell your name for the record?
My name is Amber Lynn Daniels. It's A-M-B-E-R, then a hyphen, L-Y-N-N, Daniels, D-A-N-I-E-L-S.
Spell that really fast. Okay, Mary got it.
Okay.
Mary got it. So just
Slow down.
slow down. Slow down. All right. Where are you employed?
I'm employed with the State of Ohio Department of Public Safety. The division is the Bureau of Motor Vehicles.
And how long have you been employed there?
6 years.
And what is your role with the Bureau of Motor Vehicles?
I am the commercial driver's license and special case manager. We handle CDL license suspensions, in-state and out-of-state suspensions.
Is that only for commercial drivers or for the public at large as well?
Therefore, it's a CDL, but it's for all drivers.
What kind of things do you do in that suspension bureau? What's your role?
Our role, we disqualify commercial drivers. We also suspend all drivers, whether they be commercial or non-commercial drivers. The suspensions range from violator compact suspensions, which are suspensions from other states that, like a ticket that's unpaid, that you would get in one state, and then it would suspend your Ohio license, license forfeitures, warrant blocks. We deal with a lot of medical suspensions. I basically deal with almost all the suspensions that a driver can be given.
And how long have you worked in that role?
In this role, it's been 4 years. I've been the manager over the department for the last 3.5 years.
So how many employees do you manage?
Currently 11.
You mentioned a compact.
Correct.
Is that what we commonly refer to as the interstate compact?
Correct.
Can you tell the jury what that is?
An interstate compact is we have 51 states, but there's only 45 states that are in agreement to a compact. So if you have a suspension in another state, you get penalized in the other state, whether, for whatever it would be. If you get suspended, then Ohio will recognize the other state's suspension and go ahead and suspend you here as well.
So is Ohio part of the interstate compact?
Correct. Ohio is part of the interstate compact.
Are you aware if Alabama is one of the states that is part of the interstate compact?
Yes, Alabama is one of the states as well.
So how is this done? How do you find out from Alabama that a license is suspended?
Although only 45 states are in the compact, all 51 jurisdictions, so all states share what's called the National Drivers Registry. The National Drivers Registry is shared, it's like a shared database. And the point is so someone can't have multiple licenses. So it also has a part of it that's called the Problem Driver Pointer System. And what that does is if someone is suspended in one state and we'll just say they convert to Ohio, then Ohio would run that driver in that database. And as long as another state has, it's called a block, then we would be able to see the block and we would not issue to that driver.
Have you ever personally entered somebody into the system?
If there is an error in the system, if someone should be suspended and they're not, because the system's totally relied upon, computers, and with computers things can go wrong. Maybe someone didn't put a suspension on, maybe the system was down, but if we're ever alerted that something's incorrect, then we would place a suspension on a record, and that will automatically place the driver that should be blocked. A block will go through this problem driver pointer system.
So is this a manual process or an electronic process?
It is an electronic process, but it can become manual if there is an error.
Have you experienced in Ohio times when it's failed?
In Ohio, there have been a couple of occasions where it has failed. Especially for our CDL drivers, if we have to put a pointer out there because of a medical suspension, or there's a suspension that was not placed on the record due to even human error, then we would manually have to place a pointer out there so that driver's not issued in another state.
And have you personally had to do that?
Correct. Yes, I have.
What are some instances that you can remember where you caught that there should have been a suspension? How did that happen?
Usually the only way someone is caught is if we are notified by either another state calls us and say, hey, they're trying to, Ohio drivers trying to convert their license to another state, and there's some error. They're saying that they should not be blocked. Even, I can unblock someone if, a suspension is no longer in effect. There's been instances where someone should have like a medical suspension, and then I have to place a medical suspension on a driver, therefore their driver, the license is suspended.
So when somebody walks in to apply for a license and they're run and they're suspended in another state, what should happen?
What should happen, the system, once we put in all their identifiers, which is their social security number, we'll put in their driver's license number from the other state, then automatically, as long as the other state has a block in the National Driver's Registry and there is a block within the problem driver pointer system, then automatically we'll get something on the screen at the deputy registrar's office that says, hey, there's an alert. This driver, cannot be issued, is what it will say. And we print out a piece of paper, give it to the driver, and then the driver will tell them, you cannot come back to be issued until you take care of the suspension in the other state.
So someone with an out-of-state suspension, are they able to get a valid Ohio license?
Say that one more time.
If somebody has an out-of-state suspension, are they able to get a valid Ohio license?
They would only be able to get a valid Ohio license if there's not a block in the system, if there's an error in the system, or it's kind of twofold. There's also a question, I believe, on the application that says, are you suspended in another state? So if the driver, does not let us know, and or the system, there's not a error, or a block in that system, then we would issue a license.
So in that statement, is a driver required to disclose if they have a suspension?
On the application, it does say that you would be committing perjury if you answer any of the questions incorrectly, and one of the questions do state, do you have any suspensions in this state or any other state?
So whose responsibility is it to know the status of their out-of-state license?
That will be the driver.
So if the compact fails and you get notified later that the license is in fact suspended in another jurisdiction, what do you guys do?
Immediately, usually the deputy registrar's office, they would contact investigations, and usually everything's funneled through my department. So we have contacts through various other states, and we would contact what's called the problem driver pointer system. We call it PDPS for short because it's very long, but we would contact someone at the PDPS help desk in that state. We would give them the driver's information and just verify, should they be suspended? And at that point, they would investigate to see if they should be, what's going on, what error is occurring, that there's no block in the National Driver's Registry.
Are you familiar with the file of a Joshua Gaspar?
Yes.
How did you become familiar with this file?
My assistant chief, Marcia Fisher, she had contacted me and said that an investigator had contacted her and that they believe they should not have been issued a license in the state of Ohio. I then had my lead worker, Tricia Benjamin. She went ahead, contacted the state of Alabama, talked to their pointer drivers, the problem driver pointer system, talked to their help desk, and they confirmed that he was suspended in that state and that there was some type of IT error, that they did not have a block in the National Driver's Registry.
Do you remember about when this conversation happened?
I would say, I can't give you a specific date, I would say December 2016, January 2017.
So once you found out that he had a suspension in Alabama, what did you do next?
Once we found out that he had a suspension in Alabama, they said that they would get back to us as far as placing a block in the system. I didn't know at that point, do I cancel the license immediately since he should not have been issued, or, what do we do? We had to contact our legal department. Our compliance officer, John Goulden, he went ahead and had a letter drawn up giving Mr. Gaspar 30 days to respond, basically saying that the registrar will cancel your license within 30 days if you don't ask for it. What's called an administrative hearing.
Did you, in this process, ever pull his application?
Correct.
Okay, why did you do that?
We wanted to verify if, for the investigator, he asked, for everything, for the application, to see how he answered the question of, do you have a suspension in this state or any other state?
Why is that important?
Because, you're supposed to say whether you're suspended. Like I said, it's a two-part system, so even if someone says, no, I'm not suspended, the system, the pointer drivers, the National Driver's Registry, the block should come up. But in the case that it doesn't, you're supposed to be honest and say, yes, I am blocked in this system. I am suspended in another state.
Yes.
I was going to approach the witness.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Ms. Daniels, I'm handing what's been marked as Exhibit 1472 and 1473. Would you take a moment to review those and let me know when you're ready to answer questions based on that?
Okay. Okay, I'm ready.
Can you tell the jury what those documents are?
This is a certified copy of a application for driver's license, and also for application for a temporary permit.
And
Which is which?
yes.
The temporary permit comes first, depending on what they have to apply for, and then comes the actual driver's license.
And 1472 is the temporary?
Correct.
Thank you.
Ms. Daniels, to the question regarding whether or not that applicant was suspended in any other state, what was the answer?
The applicant said, I do not have driving privileges now suspended or revoked or canceled or otherwise disqualified or subject to an out-of-service order in this state or any other state.
Is that in Exhibit 1472?
Correct.
What about Exhibit 1473?
Seems to be the very next day. He indicated, I do not have driving privileges now suspended or revoked or canceled or otherwise disqualified or subject to an out-of-service order in this state or any other state.
If somebody lies to that question, is that a validly obtained Ohio license?
No.
So you talked about a letter that you mailed Mr. Gaspar once you realized he was suspended in Alabama. How did you know what address to mail that to?
We go off of the address that's in our database, which is an address that the driver provides. They can update that whenever they receive a license, or they can call in and update the address with us.
To this date, have you received a response from Mr. Gaspar from that letter?
Yes, we did.
Okay. Was the hearing held?
No.
One moment.
Yes.
Ms. Daniels, do you know anything about reinstatement in the state of Ohio?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Can you tell the jury, can a license just automatically reinstate?
No.
Is there a process?
Yes.
Who has to initiate that process?
The driver.
Nothing further now. Thank you.
Good morning, ma'am.
Good morning.
My name's John Instead, I'm going to ask you some questions.
Okay.
If I ask anything you don't understand, you can just ask me to rephrase it.
Okay.
Okay. Ma'am, in September of 2016, what was the status of my client's driver's license?
I don't have a database in front of me. I can't recall that. I
Okay.
don't know.
Well, do you have the date that he received, on those two entries right there, do you have the date that he received a permanent license in Ohio?
Yes, sir.
What day was that?
February 10th of 2016.
Okay. And what day was that permanent license revoked based on your work on this case?
It was 30 days after the letter that was sent. From what I remember that was on the letter, the defendant had up to 30 days from the date of the letter to respond, and it wasn't received timely.
Okay, and we'll talk about that in a minute. You think that was December?
I believe that was I don't have the letter in front of me. I don't know.
Okay.
I can't recall.
When were you contacted by this investigator?
I wasn't personally contacted. My supervisor was, my assistant chief was. I believe it was December or January, December 2016, January of 2017.
Okay. So it was, to the best of your knowledge, it was after the death of the trooper in this case?
Correct.
Okay. You know that?
Yes.
What kind of investigator was this that contacted you?
He was a Bureau of Motor Vehicle investigator.
Okay. Do you know how they got onto this investigation?
No, sir, I don't.
You don't know if the Cuyahoga County Prosecutor's Office or the State Highway Patrol contacted them in an effort to try and get Josh disqualified?
No, sir.
But an investigator from your office did come maybe a month or two after the death of the trooper and start poking around Josh's file.
I know that we were contacted.
Okay. You talked about the violator compact and this computer system, and you said once in a while, I think you might have said a couple of times, it doesn't catch the out-of-state suspensions, right?
Correct.
You talk about the CDLs, which are truckers, and sometimes medical suspensions. When you said a couple times, do you really mean a couple times?
In my personal instance, when I say a couple times, I would say not technically 2 times, a handful of occasions where, are you talking about where I had to manually put something?
I guess I'm talking about the thousands of suspensions that are around. I assume we have thousands of these things in the state? Mm-hmm. More than thousands?
Maybe, I don't know.
Lots?
I would say lots.
Okay. There's only a handful where the national driver database doesn't catch the out-of-state suspension?
I don't know a number.
Okay. That you've worked on, though, that you're experiencing. This isn't a very common problem?
I wouldn't say that it's a common problem. I would say that probably since I've been working there, maybe about 10 times have we been contacted about something like that. But I mean, I don't know for sure. I don't keep track.
In dealing with Alabama, it came to your knowledge that they failed to put a suspension in?
Correct.
So let me ask you this. If I get a suspension in another state, am I required to go back to that state when the suspension's over and pay a reinstatement fee, even if I've moved to Ohio?
It depends on that state. Definitely, I can only put it in terms of like an Ohio suspension. If in Ohio, common reinstatement requirements are you have to pay a fee, and we'll just say there's a court order release because you did not meet the requirements of the court, you may fail to appear. So for us, if you leave that state or you convert to another state, our suspension is still going to be out there in the National Driver's Registry until you fulfill our requirements. So it works like that opposite in other states.
Okay. So you've looked at my client's file. Have you reviewed it for testimony today the best you could?
Briefly, yes.
Okay. Are you aware as to whether or not he was sent from a deputy registrar to a reinstatement office?
Objection.
I don't have any knowledge of that. I was just called to investigate it as far as talking to Alabama over the phone, that kind of thing. But I had no idea about that.
The state talks a lot about an individual coming in line and obtaining a license through fraud, correct?
They didn't talk to me about it.
Well, I had that in their questioning a few minutes ago. Yeah, I will do that. I apologize, sir. I'm sorry, ma'am.
Can you repeat your question?
I can. Thank you. When you were talking with the state of Ohio a minute ago, they talked about folks who come in and lie and obtain their license through fraud, correct?
I didn't hear that. I mean, they may have said that. I can't recall that.
Well,
I know in the application they asked what he said.
Let me ask you a question.
Okay.
Can you tell from a review of the record whether it's possible that somebody could have came in my client's case, my client, and said he didn't know whether he was still on suspension out of state, and then the DMV or the deputy registrar or specifically the reinstatement office could have checked him in the database and said, no, you're not, and gave him a license?
That could be a possibility.
Right, and he would have really no way of knowing, an individual wouldn't have any way of knowing that the IT department in Alabama failed to enter something, would they?
I don't know if it depends on that state. If that state did not give him his reinstatement requirements, it's a possibility, I guess.
If a citizen of Ohio, maybe a friend of yours or acquaintance came in and said, hey, my license is all messed up. How do I start the process of going to get a new license to figure out where I stand? What would you tell them to do?
We would run their information in the National Driver's Registry to see if any blocks would come up, and depending on that, we would give them that information.
And those blocks, like you said, that's pretty reliable. It's only been about a handful of times where you've caught a mistake in that system.
Correct.
Okay. And in this particular case, my client did get a valid license from the state of Ohio back on those days we talked about in that form, right?
Correct.
And it didn't go invalid until after this investigator got involved.
Correct.
Okay. Now, ma'am, you don't just pull people's licenses without giving them the opportunity for a hearing, correct?
You mean as far as canceling?
Let's talk about my client specifically,
Okay.
because you talked specifically with the prosecutor about that. It said that after you guys looked into this, you told him that he had 30 days to request a hearing.
Correct.
Okay. And, in fact, you did request a hearing to fight this, right?
Correct.
And you told him that he didn't get back to you in a timely manner.
Correct.
I think it was a day late. Is that accurate?
I believe
It
so.
was 1 day late. And you sent this notice to the address on his license.
Correct.
Okay. Were you aware that during the time period that the 30 days was passing, my client was locked up in the Cuyahoga County Jail?
No, I had no knowledge of that.
The state of Ohio didn't share that with you or the investigator?
No, sir.
Okay. Thank you. No further questions.
Judge, can we approach?
Yeah.
Ms. Daniels,
Yes.
was Mr. Gaspar disqualified because an investigator wanted him disqualified, or was he disqualified because he was suspended in the state of Alabama?
He was suspended because of the state of Alabama, and that's why his license was canceled.
Again, who is responsible to know their license is suspended?
The driver.
Is it the reinstatement office or the driver?
The driver.
How did you find out Mr. Gaspar's license was suspended?
Once we received the case and we had to do the footwork, we went ahead, contacted the Department of Motor Vehicles in Alabama. That Alabama help desk did advise us that he was suspended, and it was their error. There should have been a block in the National Drivers Registry.
Is it my understanding that it was a simple phone call that verified the status of Mr. Gaspar's license?
Correct.
Can somebody who has a license suspended in Ohio call into the Ohio DMV?
Correct.
So Mr. Gaspar could have called Alabama if he had a question about the status of his license?
Correct. And if I recall, I don't have any documents in front of me, but they let us know what he would need to do to reinstate his license.
And that was just a simple phone call, correct?
Correct.
Was this license that was obtained through those two applications a validly issued Ohio license?
No, it was not issued validly.
Nothing further, Your Honor. Thank you.
Madam, you said a simple phone call to Alabama could clear this up?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Why would someone call Alabama when they don't live there anymore, they're trying to get an Ohio license? Wouldn't the right thing to do to be talk to Ohio about getting an Ohio license?
Objection.
If
Are you able to answer that question?
I kind of don't understand the question, because I think it's more if he knew, would he be able to contact Alabama? And if he knew, he would be able to contact Alabama. I think is what he's saying, but I'm not for sure.
Would it make more sense to you when trying to obtain an Ohio license to contact the Bureau of Motor Vehicles in Ohio to discuss what requirements you need, as opposed to contacting the state you used to live in?
Objection.
Sustained.
If
That's not hypothetical. What she would do.
Do you have a special number that you can call folks at other B&Bs that the general public doesn't have?
yes, so we don't have to wait on hold.
I was just going to say that. I mean, it's not just a simple phone call. Have you ever tried to call the Ohio B&B when you don't have a special number? Or the Alabama B&B?
I haven't. I would just go on the website.
Right. This can be pretty complicated stuff, can't it?
I mean, because I work there, I guess I don't look at it that way. But to me, it's just a phone call. So you
Right.
would just call the other state, but
But you have a full-time job doing this,
correct.
and you have a special number to call, right?
We do, so we don't have to wait.
And you're the supervisor. You're trained in helping people get their license back.
Correct.
And in this particular case, if my client came to you or came to your agency and asked to get the license back, you would have taken all the steps required before just handing him a driver's license. Correct?
Correct.
In this particular case, we can assume that all those steps were taken and my client was handed an Ohio driver's license. Correct?
I guess, yes.
Whether it was, as the state says, obtained through fraudulent means or whether it's just a mistake, the fact is he walked out of there with a good license.
Objection.
If the driver went in and you're saying he doesn't, because he didn't, if you're saying if he does not know that he has a block, like it doesn't come up when he goes into the system.
Right. An old suspension he thinks is over from a year past.
And it doesn't come up and he has no knowledge, then that would be correct. It would be a valid license once he's given it, correct?
So really it all depends on what his knowledge is as to whether or not he was suspended in the other state or whether or not that suspension may have been up. That's safe to say?
Objection.
I think if a driver has knowledge and was told by the state of Alabama they're suspended, then it would be up to them to investigate and get that suspension off their record. But if they have no knowledge of that, then I guess that could be correct.
And let's clarify, suspensions are for a set amount of time, are they not?
As long as if you don't meet the requirements, they can be indefinite. Like in Ohio, they can be indefinite even if you do meet a time restriction. It may depend on a court release. There's multiple factors.
In this particular case, the suspension we're talking about was a 6-month suspension in Alabama.
Objection.
Do you know?
I have no details of what suspension it was in his. I don't have that information.
Okay.
I don't remember that.
Thank you, ma'am.
So
Did you want us to proceed into the next witness, or were we going to take a lunch break?
How long is your next one?
Your Honor, when you approach 7. Your Honor, the state of Ohio is going to call Trooper Christopher Jackson to the stand. I'm sorry, Mary, it's Charlie Jackson.
Raise your right hand. Solemnly swear or affirm subject to the penalty of perjury that the testimony about to give you will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Yeah, I do.
Good afternoon, sir. Can you please state your full name and spell it for the record?
Charles Michael Jackson, Charles.
And sir, are you employed
Yes, I am.
by whom?
The Ohio State Highway Patrol.
In what capacity, sir?
I'm a state trooper / investigator.
And how long have you been employed by Ohio State Highway Patrol?
A little over 18 years.
And what have been some of your duties there?
Started out as a normal road trooper. Did that for a few years. I did crash reconstruction for a few years temporarily. And then about 2 years ago, I had the opportunity to join our investigation unit.
And what are some of the duties associated with the investigation unit?
We investigate things outside the norm of a normal road trooper. A trooper comes across something that would take him off the road or take a lot of time, then our office would get involved and assist, if not take over.
And what sort of training experience goes into being assigned to that unit?
There's some core requirements for interviews and interrogations. We have a basic investigative class that we go through, an executive protection class that we go through, and then from there we have the opportunity to obtain other classes, which would be evidence technician classes, shooting reconstruction classes, a whole wide variety of classes that we can take and train.
And what are some of your daily responsibilities as part of the investigation unit?
For me, I have Lorraine Correctional as my main responsibility. So anything that happens inside the walls of Lorraine Correctional, if it's criminal matter, then I'll investigate it.
Now, were you employed and working with this unit on September 15th of 2016?
Yes, ma'am.
And what was your assignment that day?
That day, I was just in the office, just catching up on some cases. I wasn't in the prison that day. I was actually in the office.
And during the course of your time in the office on that day, did you have occasion to respond to the fatal crash on I-90 westbound?
Yes, ma'am, I did.
And what did you do once you received that assignment?
I was actually at lunch when we received the assignment with 3 other troopers. Once the call came in, myself and then Trooper Aussie immediately.
I'm sorry, Trooper.
Aussie, A-U-S-S-E, responded to Cleveland Metro Hospital.
And why did you respond to Cleveland Metro Hospital?
We already had officers en route to the scene of the crash, and we weren't sure if we had anyone from our office that was at the hospital there to obtain evidence.
And what did you do once you responded to the hospital?
I got to the hospital, and I was greeted by Sergeant Harris from Post 18, and we were pretty much on a standby. Trooper Velez had already ceased. At that time, I was taking orders from Sergeant Blake, who's now since retired. He ordered me to obtain any evidence necessary that I was able to get from Trooper Velez and possibly take photos.
And did you complete that task?
I was able to get to the evidence. The body picks up Trooper Velez. I was stopped. I was stopped before entering the room by Staff Lieutenant Haymaker. He felt that it would be too hard for me, being that I knew Trooper Velez for a long time. So Cleveland Police, they offered to send one of the detectives in to take photos.
And did you collect the physical evidence from Trooper Velez?
I received a biohazard bag from Sergeant Harris that contained some clothing, just a few clothing items. From there, they were secured in my vehicle, and then.
What did you do after securing those items in your vehicle?
After they were secured in the vehicle, I stood by and waiting for further orders, just to see if anyone else needed anything. Our district staff was on scene. We had people from Columbus up on scene, up at the hospital. Family was on scene. So myself and Trooper Rossi, we stood by the hospital just to see, making sure nothing else was needed. And then later on that evening, we did secure from there and then went to our Cleveland District headquarters where our office is located at and took the evidence to the evidence locker, the minimal evidence that I had.
Okay. After you deposited the evidence in the evidence locker, what did you do next as it relates to this investigation?
Afterwards, the only thing else, I had very minimal work in this case. Inside the evidence locker, the vehicles were secured, and we also assisted just by with the vehicle inventory of the suspects, Mr. Gaspar's vehicle. Assisted with that.
Explain to me the normal process through which a vehicle inventory is completed.
For this Since it was already removed from the scene and brought in later, I believe they waited for a search warrant. Once a search warrant was obtained, I believe the only thing I did with the inventory was I just documented what was called off and that was inside the vehicle. We're just documenting property that's inside the vehicle.
And what is the typical process in which an inventory of a vehicle is conducted?
We'll start in one section of the vehicle, and you work your way around inside the vehicle, just documenting what's inside.
And why is it done this way?
You try to keep it uniform, for one, so you're not doing double the work. Also, in case the reason for the search warrant is in case you come across something that would be evidence-worthy, so we're covered. And then just a document to save, to look out for us. If there's anything about monetary value, anything with a lot of money, we can make sure it's documented. If it's anything of high value, just want to make sure everything's in there is documented. Make sure nothing comes up missing.
In the case of going through this defendant's car, did you assist with that inventory?
I'm sorry, ma'am?
In the case of this defendant going through inventory his vehicle, did you assist with this?
Yes, I did.
And who were you working? Were you working with somebody else in completing the inventory?
I believe I was. I was the author. I believe the one writing on the inventory sheet.
What does that mean? You're the author.
Well, we have our inventory sheet. From there, it has the basic information, the vehicle information, it has a driver information on there. We'll document. And then underneath, what we'll have is why the vehicle's being inventoried, if it's out of a crash, a felony arrest. And then there's a section in there for the compartments of the vehicle. It would be the inside compartment in the trunk, area, glove box.
And did you complete paperwork associated with the inventory of this vehicle?
I believe so, ma'am.
And would that have been done during the normal course of your duties?
Yes, ma'am.
And what information is typically contained on the search inventory form?
Starting from the top, the date, time, where the inventory is taking place at. We'd have the driver's information if it's a driver, the owner's information if it's the owner, the vehicle information, which would be the license plate, make and model, the VIN, color. Then there'd be a section there. The majority of the form would be what you're actually documenting. What's the materials that are inside the vehicle.
And why is all this information contained on the search inventory form?
It's to protect not only us, but protect the person, the owner of the vehicle. Or documenting what's in that vehicle. We're protecting also the record driver, so no one can say something's being removed when it wasn't there. We're documenting if there's any damage to the vehicle. It's just trying to cover all bases.
May I approach, please, Your Honor?
Yes.
Sir, I'm handing you what's been marked for identification purposes. It State's Exhibit 1448. Can you take a moment to review that item? And do you recognize what that is, sir?
That's the return copy for a search warrant.
And what information is contained in that return copy as it relates to the search of the vehicle?
And this one was fabric recovered from the front license plate, 2 swabs of suspected blood, fabric from the windshield, driver's side, front registration plate from the Hyundai, 1 evident event data recorder, and then a CAAA contract / methadone paperwork / order of probation. Order of probation.
And is this form and this paperwork consistent with the information you were recorded during your vehicle inventory?
No, ma'am, it's not.
What information would it be contained in your vehicle inventory, sir?
I'm just documenting if they had a code in there, if they had money in there, if they had any kind of property, looking for property of value. We're looking for to see if there's any receipts that would assist in the investigation. If they had anything, if they have a tent, we'll document a tent, a spare tire, just personal belongings.
And from your recollection in regards to the inventory of the defendant's vehicle, was there anything of note that stuck out in your mind?
When we did the inventory, the initial inventory, there was I call them vapes or vapors. I wasn't too familiar with them. Someone said they might want to look into that.
And what about that stood out in your mind, if anything?
For me, I just documented it, I believe, on the 25, we call it 25D. I wasn't sure where they were going with that. I'm not too familiar with vapes, and I later learned it's a substitute for smoking.
Thank you. One moment, please, Your Honor.
Yeah.
Nothing further at this time, Your Honor.
No questions, Your Honor. Thank you, sir.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience. Consider your lunch. You're back downstairs at 1 o'clock. Mr. Smith will call you up. I hope she doesn't have a lot to do at lunch, but anyway, you should have a great time. Don't discuss this case. Don't let me discuss the case with you in your presence. Don't form or express the opinion. No investigation, no media accounts. I do enjoy a beautiful day out. Very sorry for this in January. Go outside. I think we have food trucks outside across the street. So, great time.
That's why I didn't think too much of it.
Your Honor, right now we have 3 scheduled. I don't know whether we're going. I forgot on Friday they said Dr. Philo is going to be testifying after the asked the authorities and forgot to tell them. Dr. Philo from medical examiners.
Coming in at 1.
Yeah, he's actually should be on 9 right now for us to meet with him.
Medical examiner after lunch? Okay.
Probably not the best plan.
Better than before.
So it appears that we have him, we have our sergeant, then another trooper.
Which sergeant?
Russell. And
Not
we-
legal.
No.